There's a specific kind of silence that falls over a first-class cabin when a line is irreparably crossed. It's not the absence of sound, but the sudden icy freezing of privilege. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes stopped abruptly. The rustling of financial newspapers ceased. Standing in the aisle of the Boeing 777, the senior flight attendant pointed a manicured finger toward the back of the plane, demanding the woman in the oversized hoodie vacate seat 1A. She had absolutely no idea she was trying to evict the new owner of the airline. Josephine Carter was, above all things, profoundly exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that settled deep into the marrow of her bones, the type that no amount of caffeine or adrenaline could mask anymore. For the past 72 hours, she had been locked in a windowless boardroom in a high-rise in Manhattan, orchestrating one of the most aggressive and highly publicized corporate takeovers in modern aviation history. Josephine, at 38, was the founder and CEO of Carter Logistics and Holding, a colossal supply chain and private equity firm that had been quietly eating up failing transportation sectors. And Meridian Airways was her latest meal. Meridian was a legacy luxury carrier. It boasted premium transcontinental and international routes, catering almost exclusively to the ultra-wealthy corporate executives and generational money. But beneath its polished veneer, Meridian was bleeding cash. Their management was bloated, their company culture was famously toxic, and their debt was staggering. Josephine had swooped in, effectively buying out the majority shareholders in a brutal, sleepless weekend negotiation. As of 4 a.m. that morning, Meridian Airways belonged to her. Now it was 8:30 p.m. at JFK's Terminal 4, and all Josephine wanted to do was fly back home to Los Angeles, crawl into her own bed, and sleep for 3 consecutive days. Because of the last-minute nature of her travel, her executive assistant had bypassed the usual private charter. Joe's Gulfstream was grounded in Chicago for maintenance anyway, and booked her directly onto one of her newly acquired commercial flights. Flight 402 JFK to LAX first class, seat 1A. Josephine walked down the jet bridge, the familiar smell of aviation fuel and conditioned air washing over her. She did not look like a billionaire corporate raider. She looked exactly like what she was in that moment, a deeply tired woman who valued comfort over presentation. She wore a slate-gray, oversized cashmere hoodie from Loro Piana, a pair of worn-in vintage Air Jordan 1s, and simple black leggings. Her natural hair was pulled back into a thick, low bun, and she carried a battered leather duffel bag that had seen her through a decade of ruthless business travel. She wore no makeup, and the dark circles under her eyes told the story of her weekend. As she stepped through the door of the Boeing 777-300ER, she was greeted by the warm, amber mood lighting of the Meridian first-class cabin. The space was opulent. 14 individual suites featuring sliding privacy doors, rich mahogany accents, and cream-colored leather upholstery. Standing at the front galley, holding a silver tray of pre-departure champagne, was Chloe Harrington. Chloe was a 30-something senior purser who carried herself as though she personally owned the aircraft. Her blonde hair was pulled into a flawless, lacquered French twist. Her red lipstick was sharp, and her uniform was impeccably tailored. Chloe prided herself on being the gatekeeper of the Meridian first-class experience. She knew exactly what her passengers looked like. They wore Tom Ford suits, carried Birkin bags, and spoke with the quiet, bored cadence of old money. When Josephine stepped onto the aircraft, Chloe's professional, beaming smile faltered, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows twitching slightly. "Excuse me," Chloe said, stepping directly into Josephine's path, effectively blocking her from entering the left aisle. Boarding for economy and premium economy hasn't commenced yet. You'll need to step back into the terminal and wait for your group to be called." Josephine paused, shifting the heavy leather duffel on her shoulder. She offered a polite, tired smile. "I'm in first class. Group 1. Chloe's gaze slowly dragged up and down Josephine's frame. It was a deeply practiced look of appraisal, one that took in the hoodie, the sneakers, and the color of Josephine's skin, rapidly computing a judgment that culminated in a wall of utter disbelief. "I see," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone dripping with patronizing sweetness. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass, please." "Of course," Josephine replied, unbothered. She was used to this. You didn't become a black female billionaire in corporate America without learning how to navigate rooms and airplanes where people assumed you didn't belong. She pulled her phone from her pocket, unlocked it, and held up the digital boarding pass. Chloe leaned in, squinting at the screen as if expecting the QR code to be drawn in crayon. Her eyes darted to the seat assignment. 1A, the flagship suite, the most expensive domestic ticket Meridian offered. Chloe's jaw tightened. She couldn't argue with the digital pass, but her entire posture radiated suspicion. "Very well, miss. Carter, right this way. The suite is the first one on the left." She did not offer Josephine a glass of champagne. She did not offer to hang her coat or help with her bag, standard protocols for Meridian's first-class service. Josephine didn't care. She just wanted to sit down. She moved past Chloe, entered Suite 1A, stowed her duffel overhead, and collapsed into the plush cream leather seat. She let out a long breath, closed her eyes, and reached for the noise-canceling headphones resting on the console. She was minutes away from sweet oblivion. But the universe and Chloe Harrington had other plans. 15 minutes later, the boarding process was well underway. The first-class cabin was filling up with Meridian's usual clientele: wealthy executives, minor celebrities hiding behind oversized sunglasses, and retirees clad in understated designer resort wear. Josephine had successfully drifted into a light doze when the heavy thud of a hard-shell Rimowa suitcase hitting the bulkhead jolted her awake. "What do you mean someone is in 1A? I always sit in 1A, a loud, booming voice echoed through the front galley. Josephine blinked, pulling one side of her headphones back. Standing near the cockpit door was a man who looked like he had been mass-produced in a Wall Street factory. He was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored navy suit with the collar open, a glittering Rolex Daytona on his wrist, and a flush of annoyance spreading across his cheeks. This was Richard Belmont. He was a high-frequency trader, a Meridian Platinum Elite member, and a man who believed the world owed him its immediate and undivided attention. Chloe was standing next to him, her posture submissive and apologetic, a stark contrast to the rigid wall she had presented to Josephine. "Mr. Belmont, I am so incredibly sorry," Chloe cooed, her hand resting lightly on his arm to placate him. "There seems to have been a glitch in the ticketing system. You are currently assigned to 2B, which is just behind." "I don't want 2B, Chloe," Richard snapped, cutting her off. "You know I get claustrophobic unless I have the bulkhead suite. I fly this route twice a week. Who is in my seat?" Chloe's eyes flicked over Richard's shoulder, landing squarely on Josephine's suite. The privacy door was open, and Josephine was sitting quietly, watching the interaction with a detached, clinical interest. "Let me handle this, Mr. Belmont," Chloe said softly, her voice carrying a sudden edge of determination. "Let me get you a glass of the vintage Dom Perignon, and I will sort this out immediately." Richard huffed, crossing his arms and leaning against the galley wall, staring unapologetically at Josephine with a mix of irritation and sheer disdain. Chloe took a deep breath, pasted on her most authoritative customer service smile, and marched down the aisle to Suite 1A. She stopped at the entrance, clasping her hands tightly in front of her. "Mrs. Carter," Chloe said, her voice loud enough that the surrounding passengers turned their heads. "I'm afraid we have a bit of a situation." Josephine did not adjust her posture. She simply looked up at the flight attendant. "What kind of situation?" "There has been a ticketing error," Chloe lied smoothly, her eyes completely devoid of warmth. "This seat, 1A, was actually pre-booked by one of our highest-tier elite members. Because of a computer glitch, your ticket was double-booked. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things and relocate." Josephine's mind, usually buzzing with complex financial algorithms and logistical matrices, went completely still. She knew exactly how airline reservation systems worked. Her company had just audited Meridian's entire IT infrastructure 3 days ago. There were no double-booking glitches in the flagship suites. "A ticketing error," Josephine repeated, her voice calm, devoid of any visible emotion. "That's interesting. I booked this seat directly. My ticket has already been scanned and validated at the gate." "I understand it's an inconvenience," Chloe said, her tone growing firmer, adopting the cadence of a schoolteacher scolding a stubborn child. "But Mr. Belmont is a platinum elite flyer. Airline policy dictates that in the event of an overlap, priority goes to our loyal status members. I have a very comfortable seat for you in premium economy, row 14. I'll even waive the fee for your in-flight Wi-Fi." The audacity of the offer hung in the air like a bad smell. Up in row 2, an older woman gasped softly. Richard Belmont stood in the galley, smirking, swirling his champagne. Josephine looked at Chloe. She looked really closely at her. She saw the microaggressions stacked upon one another like a house of cards. She saw the calculation Chloe had made. This woman in the hoodie does not belong here. This man in the suit does. She will fold if I pressure her. "No," Josephine said quietly. Chloe blinked, her fake smile cracking at the edges. "Excuse me, I said no," Josephine repeated, her voice remaining perfectly even. "I am not moving to row 14. I paid for seat 1A. It is my seat, mister. Belmont will have to survive the 5-hour flight in 2B. Chloe's face flushed a deep mottled red. The defiance was unexpected. In Chloe's world, people who looked like Josephine, dressed like Josephine, were supposed to shrink when challenged by authority. They were supposed to apologize and move out of the way. "Mrs. Carter," Chloe said, dropping the pretense of customer service entirely. Her voice became cold and hard. "I am not asking you. I am telling you. You are in a seat that does not belong to you. If you do not gather your bags and move to the back of the aircraft immediately, I will be forced to take further action." From the galley, Richard chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension. "Just move, lady. Some of us actually have important meetings tomorrow and need the rest. Don't make this a whole civil rights thing." Josephine's eyes snapped away from Chloe and locked onto Richard. The temperature in the cabin seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Even Richard, emboldened by his own entitlement, took a subtle half-step back under the absolute freezing intensity of Josephine's stare. She turned her attention back to the purser. "What is your name?" "My name is Chloe Harrington. I am the senior purser on this flight," she said proudly, puffing out her chest. "Chloe Harrington," Josephine said, committing the name to a memory that never forgot a detail. "Chloe, I'm going to give you one opportunity to walk away, apologize to me, and tell Mr. Belmont to take his assigned seat. If you do not do that, you are going to deeply regret how the rest of this evening unfolds." The silence in the cabin was now absolute. The surrounding passengers had abandoned their books and screens, entirely captivated by the escalating drama. Chloe let out a breathy, incredulous laugh. She felt challenged, disrespected in her own domain, and the threat, calm and measured as it was, pushed her over the edge. Are you threatening me? Chloe demanded, her voice shrill, echoing down the aisle. You are threatening a flight crew member. That is a federal offense, Miss Carter. I have tried to be accommodating. I have tried to fix this glitch quietly. But you are now causing a disturbance, and I will not tolerate this kind of aggressive behavior on my aircraft. Aggressive. Josephine noted the word choice, the classic tired weaponization of the angry black woman trope. Josephine hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't moved from her seat. She was practically reclined. Yet, to Chloe, her mere refusal to be bullied was an act of violence. I am not moving, Josephine stated, definitive and final. Call whoever you need to call. Chloe spun around, marching toward the front galley phone. She picked up the intercom receiver, her hands shaking with indignation, and punched in a code. Captain, I need you out here. We have a non-compliant passenger in 1A refusing crew instructions and causing a hostile environment. I want her removed from the aircraft. Richard Belmont leaned over, speaking loud enough for the cabin to hear. Unbelievable. This is what happens when airlines start handing out upgrade vouchers like candy. Trash gets in the front. Josephine ignored him. Her heart was beating a little faster, the adrenaline finally cutting through her exhaustion, but her exterior remained carved from ice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She didn't open a social media app to start recording. She didn't need the court of public opinion. She had the board of directors. She scrolled to her favorites and tapped a number. It rang twice before it was picked up. Joe? The voice on the other end answered. It was David Sterling. Wait, no, David Kensington, her chief operating officer and head of acquisitions. Please tell me you're not calling to tweak the merger documents again. It's almost 9 at night. Let the lawyers sleep, David, Josephine said, her voice low, crisp, and cutting through the ambient noise of the cabin. Are the transaction documents fully executed? Is the ink dry on the Meridian acquisition? There was a pause on the line. David immediately sensed the shift in her tone. The banter vanished. Yes, the SEC filings went through at 4:30 p.m. The wire transfer cleared. Carter Holdings officially owns 78% of Meridian Airways. You are the controlling shareholder, Joe. Why? What's going on? I'm sitting on one of our planes, Josephine said, her eyes fixed on Chloe, who was furiously whispering to a gate agent who had just rushed down the jet bridge. Flight 402 out of JFK. I'm currently being threatened with removal by a senior purser named Chloe Harrington because she wants to give my seat to a white man who didn't book it. She cited a ticketing glitch. David cursed loudly through the receiver. Are you kidding me? Do you want me to call the CEO? The old CEO doesn't work here anymore, David. I do, Josephine said smoothly. Call the operations center. Tell them the new owner of the airline is currently on flight 402, and she is about to be dragged off her own aircraft. Tell them if I am removed from this plane, I will personally dissolve the entire executive leadership team by midnight. Done, David said, his voice hard. Give me 2 minutes. Josephine hung up and placed the phone face down on the center console. At that exact moment, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Thomas Arris stepped out. He was a silver-haired, distinguished-looking man in his late 50s, a veteran pilot who commanded respect the moment he entered a room. He looked annoyed at the delay. What is going on here? Captain Arris demanded, looking from the gate agent to Richard Belmont and finally to Chloe. Captain, Chloe said, rushing to his side, playing the victim perfectly. She gestured toward Josephine. This passenger is sitting in Mr. Belmont's seat. She is claiming it is hers, but we have an elite status override. When I asked her politely to relocate to premium economy, she became hostile, uncooperative, and threatened me. I want her off the plane so we can push back. Richard nodded in agreement. She's completely unhinged, Captain. Get security down here and drag her off. Captain Aris frowned. He hated gate drama. He turned his attention down the aisle, looking past Chloe to the woman sitting in 1A. He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he tried to get a better look at the passenger who was allegedly causing a riot. Josephine sat up slightly, pulling the hood back from her head, letting the harsh cabin light hit her face fully. She looked directly into the captain's eyes. Captain Aris froze. He didn't just freeze. The blood visibly drained from his face. Unlike Chloe, who only saw race and class indicators, and unlike Richard, who only saw a roadblock to his entitlement, Captain Thomas Aris was a man who read the company memos. He was a senior union representative for the pilots. He had spent the last 3 days glued to the financial news, watching as Meridian Airways was bought out from under its failing board by a notoriously ruthless, brilliant logistics mogul. He had seen the press releases. He had stared at the high-resolution photo of the woman who now controlled his pension, his roots, and his future. He knew exactly who was sitting in 1A. Chloe, Captain Aris said, his voice suddenly sounding very dry. He didn't take his eyes off Josephine. "Yes, Captain?" Chloe said, practically glowing with smug victory, waiting for him to order the gate agent to call the Port Authority police. "Whose seat did you say she was in?" The captain asked slowly, taking another step down the aisle, his posture transforming from authoritative to deeply deferential. "She's in 1A, Captain. It belongs to Mr. Belmont," Chloe insisted, pointing at Richard, who was puffing his chest out. Captain Aris finally broke eye contact with Josephine and turned to look at his senior purser. The look he gave Chloe was a mixture of profound pity and absolute terror. "Chloe," Captain Aris said, his voice echoing in the dead-silent cabin, "that seat does not belong to Mr. Belmont. And it doesn't just belong to the woman sitting in it." He took a deep breath, adjusting his uniform tie, as if preparing for a firing squad. "That woman," the captain continued, gesturing respectfully toward Josephine, "owns this airplane. She owns this airline. That is Josephine Carter." The silence that followed Captain Aris's words was not merely quiet. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the entire cabin. It was the sound of an established social hierarchy violently inverting itself in a matter of seconds. Chloe Harrington's impeccably manicured hand slowly dropped from where she had been pointing at Josephine. Her mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted from the captain's grim, pale face to the woman lounging in the oversized Loro Piana hoodie, desperately searching for the punchline to a terrible, career-ending joke. "Captain," Chloe finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling, stripped of all its former authority. That's impossible. Look at her. She's not. The email from corporate said the new owner was. The email from corporate, Captain Aris interrupted, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding register he usually reserved for emergency protocols, contained a high-resolution photograph of the new chairman and CEO of this airline, Ms. Josephine Carter. I suggest you look at it, Chloe, because you are currently standing over her, threatening to have Port Authority drag her off her own aircraft. Richard Belmont let out a sharp, dismissive scoff, though the sound lacked its previous bravado. He shifted his weight, the ice clinking nervously against the crystal of his champagne glass. "Hold on a second, Aris. This is absurd. I know the logistics sector. I know Carter Holdings. I play golf with their VP of acquisitions. You're telling me this woman just bought Meridian?" Josephine finally moved. She uncrossed her legs, planted her vintage Air Jordans firmly on the carpeted floor of the suite, and sat forward. She rested her elbows on her knees, clasping her hands together. When she spoke, her voice was conversational, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "You play golf with Harrison Miller?" Josephine asked, tilting her head. Richard blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, Harry and I are at the same country club in Connecticut. Harrison has a terrible slice on his backswing," Josephine said evenly. "He also submitted his resignation to me at 11 a.m. this morning, because I found out he had been quietly shorting Meridian's stock prior to the acquisition. So, unless you're planning on playing golf with an unemployed man facing an SEC investigation for insider trading, I suggest you find a new country club, Richard." Richard's face drained of color. The arrogant sneer melted off his features, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization. High-frequency traders survived on information. Josephine had just effortlessly dropped highly classified corporate intelligence that wouldn't hit the Bloomberg terminals until the market opened on Monday. She wasn't bluffing. She was exactly who she said she was. Before Richard could formulate a response, the heavy, frantic sound of footsteps echoed down the jet bridge. A man in a high-visibility ramp vest and a suit hastily thrown over it came sprinting through the aircraft door, completely out of breath. It was Gregory Davies, the JFK station manager for Meridian Airways. His radio was squawking wildly on his hip. Gregory practically collided with the gate agent, his eyes scanning the first-class cabin in sheer panic until they locked onto seat 1A. "Mrs. Carter!" Gregory gasped, pushing past a frozen Chloe and a stunned Richard. He stopped short of the suite, physically bowing his head in deference. "Mrs. Carter, I am so incredibly sorry. We just received an emergency call from the operations center. Mr. Kensington from your office contacted the tower. I had no idea you were manifesting on a commercial flight tonight. If we had known, we would have arranged a private terminal transfer, a VIP escort, anything." "It's fine, Gregory," Josephine said, her tone professional and calm. "I didn't want a parade. I just wanted to go to Los Angeles." "Of course, ma'am." "Absolutely," Gregory babbled, sweat beading on his forehead. He turned, his eyes narrowing into slits as he looked at Chloe and Richard. "What is the delay here? Why aren't we pushing back?" "Gregory," Josephine said, stopping him before he could start yelling at the crew. "We are delayed because Miss Harrington here informed me that due to a ticketing glitch, my seat actually belongs to Mr. Belmont. She offered me a very generous reassignment to row 14 in premium economy. When I declined, she threatened me with federal charges and ordered Captain Aris to have me removed by security." Gregory looked at Chloe as if she had just detonated a bomb in the middle of the fuselage. "You did what?" Gregory hissed, his voice cracking. Chloe took a physical step backward, her back hitting the galley partition. The polished, unbothered purser was gone. In her place was a woman actively watching her livelihood incinerate before her eyes. I didn't know," Chloe cried out, her composure shattering. Her hands flew up to her face, tears instantly welling in her eyes. "There was a double booking on the manifest, Mr. Belmont is a platinum elite, and he was upset, and she wasn't dressed like a first-class passenger. I was just following standard procedure for disruptive passengers. I didn't know who she was." Josephine stood up. She wasn't remarkably tall, but in that moment she commanded the space as if she were 10 feet high. The entire cabin held its collective breath. "That," Josephine said, her voice ringing clear and cold through the cabin, "is the entire problem, Chloe. You didn't know who I was, but it shouldn't matter." Josephine stepped out of the suite, standing shoulder to shoulder with Captain Aris and the station manager. She looked directly at Chloe, whose tears were now freely ruining her immaculate makeup. "If I were a schoolteacher," Josephine began, her words landing like precise strikes from a scalpel, or a nurse, or a mother who had saved up for 5 years to buy a first-class ticket. your behavior would have been exactly the same. You looked at my clothes, you looked at my skin, and you made a calculation. You decided that my presence in this cabin was an anomaly to be corrected. You didn't apologize to me just now, Chloe. You apologized to my net worth. And that is exactly the kind of toxic rot I am gutting from this company. Chloe let out a muffled sob, burying her face in her hands. Gregory, Josephine said, not breaking her gaze from the weeping flight attendant. Yes, Miss Carter, the station manager replied instantly. Monsieur Harrington is suspended, effective immediately, pending a full HR investigation into passenger discrimination, Josephine ordered. She is not to serve on this flight. Please escort her off my aircraft, collect her security badge, and arrange for her transportation home. No, please, Chloe begged, reaching a hand out. Please, Miss Carter, I have 12 years of seniority. I have a mortgage. It was a mistake. Actions have consequences, Chloe, Josephine said softly. You weaponized your authority to bully a passenger you thought was powerless. You leave me no choice. Gregory signaled to the gate agent, who gently but firmly took Chloe by the arm, leading the devastated, sobbing purser off the aircraft. The heavy clanking of her sensible heels on the metal jet bridge echoed like a death knell. With Chloe gone, Josephine turned her attention to the man standing rigidly against the bulkhead. Richard Belmont looked like a man who had suddenly realized he was standing on the tracks, and the train was already 3 feet away. His arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate, sweating need for self-preservation. Mrs. Carter, Richard said, attempting a deeply unconvincing, charming smile. He straightened his tie. Listen, this got entirely out of hand. The flight attendant overreacted. I was perfectly willing to take 2B. Just a misunderstanding between tired travelers, right? No hard feelings. Josephine looked at him. She looked at the man who, less than 5 minutes ago, had referred to her as trash, that had been let into the front of the plane. Mr. Belmont, Josephine said, her tone devoid of any warmth. You fly this route twice a week, I understand. Yes, ma'am, exclusively Meridian. I'm a loyal platinum elite, he said eagerly, hoping his corporate spending would shield him. Not anymore, Josephine replied. Richard's smile vanished. Excuse me, you incited a hostile environment. You verbally harassed another passenger. You pressured my staff into breaking federal aviation seating regulations to accommodate your entitlement. Josephine listed off smoothly. Gregory, pull up, mister. Belmont's Sky Miles account. Gregory, pulling a company tablet from his vest, tapped furiously. Got it, Ms. Carter. Revoke his platinum status, Josephine commanded. Drain his mileage bank to 0. And add Richard Belmont to the Meridian Airways permanent no-fly list. A collective gasp echoed from row 3. Richard's eyes bulged out of his head. For a Wall Street executive, losing top-tier airline status and being banned from a legacy carrier was a massive logistical nightmare and a devastating blow to his ego. You can't do that, Richard bellowed, his face turning an angry, mottled purple. I spend $200,000 a year with this airline. You can't ban me for asking for a seat. I can do whatever I want, Richard. I own the planes, Josephine said, her voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. Now, you have exactly 30 seconds to gather your Rimowa suitcase and walk off this aircraft under your own power, or Captain Aris is going to call the Port Authority police and have you dragged off in handcuffs for causing a disturbance. Your choice. Richard looked at the captain. Captain Aris crossed his arms, his face a mask of stone, nodding once to confirm he would absolutely make that call. Trapped, humiliated, and utterly defeated, Richard grabbed his suitcase from the overhead bin. He didn't look at anyone. He practically sprinted down the aisle, his head bowed. the wheels of his expensive luggage clattering loudly as he disappeared onto the jet bridge. The cabin was dead silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Josephine took a deep, steadying breath. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, the exhaustion suddenly threatening to crash over her again. She looked at Captain Aris. "Captain," she said, her tone softening back to a professional baseline. "Who is your junior purser on this flight?" From the back of the first-class galley, a young woman in her late 20s nervously stepped forward. She had been standing in the shadows the entire time, her eyes wide with shock. "I am, ma'am," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Mia Campbell." Josephine looked at Mia. "Mia, are you certified to lead the first-class cabin?" "Yes, ma'am," Mia nodded quickly. "I just got my senior certification last month." "Congratulations," Josephine said. "You're the senior purser for this flight. Secure the cabin, close the boarding door, and let's get to Los Angeles. I am very tired." "Yes, Miss Carter." "Right away, Ms. Carter." Mia sprang into action, a mix of sheer terror and exhilarating relief washing over her. Josephine turned back to her suite, stepping inside and sliding the mahogany privacy door halfway shut. She sat down, letting the deep comfort of the leather envelope her. She reached for her headphones, but before she could put them on, Captain Aris stepped up to the door. He offered a crisp, sharp salute, a genuine mark of respect. "Welcome aboard, boss," the captain said quietly. Josephine offered a tired, genuine smile. "Thank you, Captain. Let's fly." The Boeing 777-300ER pushed back from the gate at JFK 22 minutes behind schedule, but not a single passenger in the first-class cabin dared to utter a word of complaint. The ambient hum of the massive GE90 engines spinning to life was the only sound that dared to pierce the thick, shell-shocked quiet. Inside Suite 1A, Josephine Carter finally slid the mahogany privacy door completely shut. The ambient amber lighting softened the sharp angles of her exhausted face. She leaned her head back against the cream leather headrest, feeling the subtle, powerful vibrations of the aircraft as it taxied toward the runway. For the first time in what felt like a month, she was entirely alone. No lawyers, no board members, no aggressively entitled frequent flyers, just the quiet isolation of 30,000 feet. A gentle, tentative knock tapped against her sliding door. Josephine pressed the button to retract the panel. Mia Campbell stood there, holding a silver tray with a single, perfectly chilled glass of sparkling water with a twist of lime. Exactly what Josephine's executive assistant had noted in her internal profile years ago, though Josephine had never expected a Meridian crew to actually read it. "Excuse me, Miss Carter," Mia said, her voice steady but undeniably laced with residual adrenaline. "I just wanted to make sure you had everything you needed before we are cleared for takeoff. And I wanted to apologize for the delay." Josephine took the glass, her dark eyes studying the young woman. Mia's uniform was immaculate, but her posture lacked the rigid, performative arrogance that Chloe had weaponized. Instead, Mia radiated an earnest, if slightly terrified, dedication. "You don't need to apologize for a delay you didn't cause, Mia," Josephine said gently, taking a sip of the water. "How long have you been with Meridian?" 3 years, ma'am," Mia answered politely, keeping her hands clasped behind her back. "I started on the regional hoppers out of Atlanta. Just got moved to the transcontinental wide bodies last season." "Do you like it?" Josephine asked. It wasn't polite small talk. She was actively assessing the ground-level morale of her new multi-billion-dollar asset. Mia hesitated. The golden rule of corporate survival was never to complain to the CEO, especially one who had just publicly executed a senior staff member's career less than 30 minutes ago. But there was something intensely grounding about Josephine. She didn't look like a tyrant. She looked like a woman who simply refused to tolerate nonsense. "I love flying, Miss Carter," Mia said carefully. "The actual job of keeping people safe and comfortable in the air is wonderful. The culture, however, has been challenging. There's a very strict hierarchy. A lot of the junior crew are taught to prioritize the demands of certain demographics over the actual policies. We are taught to look the other way." Josephine nodded slowly. It confirmed everything David Kensington's internal audits had suggested. Meridian was rotting from the inside out, plagued by a culture of elitism that shielded toxic behavior under the guise of premium customer service. "Not anymore," Josephine said quietly. "You're the senior purser now, Mia. Run this cabin exactly by the book. Treat the person in seat 14 with the same dignity as the person in 1A. If anyone gives you grief, you tell them to take it up with the chairman." Mia's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch as relief washed over her. A genuine smile broke through her anxiety. "Yes, ma'am, I will. Have a wonderful flight, Miss Carter." As Mia slid the door closed, the aircraft engines roared to full thrust, pinning Josephine back against her seat as Flight 402 launched into the dark, cloudy New York sky. Within 10 minutes, they breached the cloud cover, settling into the smooth, frictionless cruise of high altitude. Josephine reclined her seat into a fully flat bed, pulled the plush duvet over her shoulders, and closed her eyes. She was asleep before the seatbelt sign turned off. While Josephine slept, a completely different kind of turbulence was violently erupting back on the ground. In his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, David Kensington was not sleeping. He was staring at 3 different computer monitors, his phone pressed against his ear. David was a ruthless operational tactician who treated corporate PR the same way a general treated a ground war. On his center monitor was a social media post that was rapidly gaining traction. Richard Belmont, currently fuming in a VIP lounge at JFK while trying to rebook a flight on a competitor airline, had decided that his bruised ego required immediate public vindication. He had taken to his highly followed professional networking and social media accounts to launch a smear campaign. "Just experienced the most appalling illegal treatment on Meridian Airways. Was physically threatened and thrown off my flight because an unhinged violent passenger in first class threw a tantrum and bribed the crew to steal my assigned seat. This airline caters to thugs and punishes loyal, high-paying customers. I will be suing for breach of contract and emotional distress. Avoid Meridian." The post already had 4,000 retweets. Financial blogs were picking it up. The narrative was spinning out of control. A wealthy white executive unjustly persecuted by a failing airline catering to a woke mob. "David, are you seeing this?" The voice of Sarah Jenkins, Carter Holdings' VP of Public Relations, crackled through the speakerphone. "Belmont is trying to control the narrative. His followers are already flooding Meridian's customer service lines. They're demanding boycotts. Should we issue a standard corporate denial?" David let out a dark, predatory chuckle. "A standard denial? Sarah, we just spent $4 billion acquiring this airline. I am not letting some bloated, high-frequency day trader tank our stock price before the opening bell on Monday because he's throwing a temper tantrum about losing his sky miles." "So, what's the play?" Sarah asked. "We annihilate him," David said simply. "Do we have the incident report from the JFK station manager? Gregory Davies just emailed it over. We also have sworn affidavits from Captain Aris, the junior purser, and 3 first-class passengers who witnessed the entire exchange." Belmont instigated the conflict, used racially coded language, and attempted to coerce a flight attendant into violating federal seating manifests. "Perfect," David said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Draft a press release. I don't want corporate jargon. I want it sharp. Announce the official completion of the Meridian acquisition by Carter Holdings. Announce Josephine Carter as the new CEO. And then we address Mr. Belmont directly. You want to call him out by name? Sarah asked, shocked. That opens us up to defamation. It's not defamation if it's the absolute truth, and we have the receipts. David countered. Release the fact that Mr. Belmont was permanently banned from Meridian Airways, not because of a ticketing dispute, but because he engaged in discriminatory, hostile behavior toward the new owner of the airline, Josephine Carter, whom he mistook for an unauthorized passenger. Let the internet connect the dots on exactly why he thought she didn't belong in first class. There was a brief silence on the line as Sarah processed the sheer audacity of the strategy. It was a masterclass in weaponized transparency. It's going to be a bloodbath, Sarah noted, though she sounded excited. Make it bleed, David ordered, and CC the compliance officer at Belmont's trading firm. Let's see how much they love their star trader when he becomes the national face of corporate racism by sunrise. 4.5 hours later, the flight crew prepared the cabin for final descent into Los Angeles International Airport. Josephine awoke feeling marginally more human. The deep exhaustion was still there, a low ache in her temples, but the sharp, jagged edges of her fatigue had been blunted by the unbroken rest. She sat up, running a hand over her hair to smooth it, and opened her window shade. The sprawling, glittering grid of Los Angeles stretched out beneath the aircraft, a sea of amber streetlights breaking through the early morning fog. Mia appeared at the suite door within seconds of Josephine sitting up, offering a steaming mug of black coffee and a warm towel. "Good morning, Ms. Carter," Mia said, her demeanor bright and professional. "We'll be touching down at LAX in about 20 minutes. The station manager in Los Angeles has already messaged the flight deck. They have a private car waiting for you on the tarmac." "Thank you, Mia," Josephine said, accepting the coffee. The service was impeccable. Mia beamed, a genuine flush of pride coloring her cheeks. "It was an honor, ma'am." Josephine connected her phone to the aircraft's Wi-Fi network to check her emails before landing. The moment her device synced, it practically exploded. Hundreds of notifications, missed calls, text messages, and news alerts flooded her screen in a chaotic cascade. She frowned, tapping on a message from David Kensington. It was a single link to a global news aggregator, accompanied by a text, "Checkmate. Have a good landing." Josephine clicked the link. The headline of a major financial publication glared back at her. "Meridian Airways bought out by Logistics, Titan, Josephine Carter. Elite flyer banned in viral racial clash with new CEO." Josephine scrolled through the article. David and Sarah had executed a flawless, devastating counter-offensive. They had completely neutralized Richard Belmont's attempt to paint himself as the victim. The article detailed the entire exchange on the tarmac. The internet, predictably, had taken the story and run with it at terrifying speed. Belmont's original social media post had been ratioed into oblivion, swarmed by commentators mocking his entitlement and exposing his attempt to bully a billionaire. Even worse for Richard, the public relations fallout had already breached the walls of his employer. A secondary article linked at the bottom noted that Vanguard Equities, Belmont's trading firm, had issued a 3:00 a.m. statement announcing that Richard Belmont had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending an internal review of his conduct unbecoming of corporate values. As for Chloe Harrington, the narrative was equally unforgiving. Aviation forums and employee unions were buzzing. While some tried to defend her actions as a misunderstanding, the overwhelming consensus, backed by the testimonies of the other passengers, was that she had profiled Josephine based on race and attire, a fatal error in judgment that had rightly cost her her job. Josephine locked her phone and set it down. She didn't feel a triumphant rush of victory. She didn't take pleasure in destroying Richard Belmont's reputation or ending Chloe's career. To her, it was simply a necessary surgical extraction. You could not build a healthy company on a foundation of rot. They were casualties of their own hubris, and she would not lose a second of sleep over them. The heavy landing gear deployed with a loud mechanical clunk, and minutes later, the Boeing 777 touched down smoothly on the LAX runway, the thrust reversers roaring as the massive aircraft decelerated. As the plane taxied to a remote VIP stand away from the main terminal, Captain Aris's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the flight crew, welcome to Los Angeles. For your safety, please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. And on a personal note, I would like to officially welcome our new chairman and CEO, Ms. Josephine Carter, who flew with us tonight. It is a new day at Meridian Airways, and we are proud to have you on board." A spontaneous round of applause broke out in the first-class cabin. Josephine shrank slightly into her hoodie, offering a polite wave to the passengers who craned their necks to look at her. She hated the spotlight, but she understood the necessity of the theater. The aircraft came to a halt. The door was opened by the ground crew, and true to Mia's word, a sleek black SUV was waiting directly on the tarmac at the bottom of the air stairs. Josephine gathered her battered leather duffel bag. She paused at the galley, turning to Captain Aris and Mia. "Captain, excellent landing," Josephine said, extending her hand. Captain Aris shook it firmly. "Thank you for flying with us, boss. We needed a change. I think you're exactly what this airline requires." "We have a lot of work to do," Josephine agreed. She turned to Mia. "Mia, expect a call from corporate HR on Monday. I'm restructuring the in-flight training program to focus on de-escalation and anti-bias protocols. I want you on the advisory committee. You have the right instincts." Mia's eyes widened, her mouth falling open slightly. Yes, absolutely, Miss Carter. Thank you." Josephine offered a final nod and descended the airstairs into the cool, marine-layered air of the Los Angeles morning. She climbed into the back of the waiting SUV, dropping her heavy bag onto the floorboards. As the car drove away from the towering aircraft, slipping through the restricted access gates of the airport, Josephine looked out the tinted window. The drama of the past 12 hours had been exhausting, a stark reminder of the systemic prejudices that still infected the highest tiers of luxury and corporate America. Wealth and status were supposed to be the ultimate shields, but Josephine knew better. The world still saw the hoodie and the skin color before they saw the crown. But things were going to change. She pulled out her phone, dialing David's number. He answered on the first ring, sounding entirely too awake for a man who had been managing a corporate crisis all night. "Did you see the news?" David asked, the smug satisfaction practically vibrating through the phone line. "I saw it, David. Excellent work. Belmont's firm put him on leave. They'll fire him by Wednesday," David predicted confidently. "The PR damage is too heavy, and we're seeing a massive surge in positive sentiment for Meridian across all demographics. The undercover billionaire CEO takes down racist passengers angle is playing phenomenally well. Stock futures are actually up 4%. "Good," Josephine said, leaning back into the plush leather of the SUV. "Let's capitalize on it. I want a full press conference on Tuesday. We announced the new anti-discrimination charter. I want it codified that any Meridian employee found profiling passengers will be terminated with cause, no severance, and any passenger found harassing crew or other guests will be permanently banned." No exceptions for elite status. We are cleaning house. You're going to terrify the old guard shareholders, Joe, David warned, though he didn't sound opposed to the idea. Let them be terrified, Josephine replied, her voice steady, hardened by the night's events. If they don't like the new rules, they can sell their shares. I'm buying. She ended the call, letting the silence of the luxury vehicle wash over her as it merged onto the 405 freeway. The sun was just beginning to peek over the San Gabriel Mountains, casting a brilliant golden light across the sprawling city. Josephine Carter closed her eyes, finally allowing the sheer weight of her victory to settle into her bones. She had bought an airline, dismantled a bully, fired a bigot, and shifted the cultural paradigm of a legacy corporation, all before her morning coffee. It was going to be a very good week. The story of Josephine Carter is a powerful reminder that true authority doesn't always wear a tailored suit, and that entitlement will always crumble in the face of absolute, unyielding competence. It's a testament to the fact that you should never judge a book by its cover, because the person you're trying to kick out of the room might just own the entire building. If this story of corporate justice, quick karma, and breaking boundaries resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories.